Welcome back, everyone. Today, we're diving into a really fascinating explainer on the true legal power of preambles. We're going straight from the very basics right down to the absolute bedrock of a nation's laws. If you've ever wondered how just a few introductory paragraphs can literally bind the hands of lawmakers and completely shape a country's destiny, well, you're absolutely in the right place. Let's just jump right in.
Okay, so let's kick things off with your standard definition of a preamble. I think most of us, when we see one, we kind of just assume it's a simple, formal introduction. It's the throat clearing before the actual rules begin, right? It sets the stage, gives a bit of historical context, and maybe outlines the broad philosophy of what you're about to read. But as we dig into the source material for this explainer, we're going to see that treating all preambles as equals, yeah, that's a massive legal mistake.
And this brilliantly illustrates a really profound legal paradox we found right in our source notes. This quote completely flips how we view these texts. Notice the stark contrast here. A statutory preamble is just a servant. It's literally just there to help figure out confusing wording inside one specific law. But the constitutional preamble, that is the guiding star. It doesn't just assist, it leads. It illuminates the entire legal framework of a nation.
So here is exactly how we're going to unpack all this today. First up, servant versus guiding star. Second, comparing the preambles. Third, the Supreme Court battles. Fourth, amending the basic structure. And finally, a living organic document.
All right, Section 1, servant versus guiding star. Let's look at the actual difference between these two types of preambles. Now, what's really fascinating about our source notes is how they cement this dichotomy. They emphasize the point clearly. Now, sure, both constitutional and statutory preambles act as a key to open the minds of the makers, but the notes make it explicitly clear. The statutory preamble is merely a servant to resolve textual ambiguity. The constitutional preamble, on the other hand, is the guiding star. It doesn't just sit pretty at the front of a document. It informs and illuminates the entire legal framework. It sets the overarching moral and legal tone for literally everything that follows. Moving right along to Section 2, comparing the preambles. What are the actual functional differences here?
When we break down the rules of the game, I want you to pay close attention to the status and primary role differences. A statutory preamble is strictly limited to one piece of legislation. It's basically just an aid to interpretation, totally subordinate to the actual enacting sections of the law. If the law is perfectly clear, the statutory preamble basically just steps aside. But look at the constitutional preamble. It's elevated to being part of the basic structure of the nation itself. While a statutory preamble just clarifies the specific mischief, the exact legal loophole or problem that one particular act intends to cure, the constitutional preamble defines the political, social, and legal philosophy of the entire country. It literally dictates the legitimacy of all other legislative acts. It's a total game changer. To put this into actual case law terms, we've got two excellent examples from the notes. In our first example, the Sussex peerage case, shows us that statutory preambles are, well, effectively stuck in the past. They're fixed to the specific historical mischief of their time. They solve one specific problem and stop there. But our second example, the Ashok Tanwar case from 2005, proves that constitutional preambles operate on a completely different level. They are dynamic. They allow the Constitution to be a living and organic thing that can actually meet the shifting needs of a changing world. It's essentially the difference between a static blueprint and a growing, living tree. Okay, Section 3, the Supreme Court battles. How did the courts actually define these legal rules? The evolution of the Indian Supreme Court stance on this is honestly a dramatic narrative of legal reversals. When you look at the timeline of events spanning from 1960 to 1994, the highest court in the land had to seriously grapple with what the preamble actually meant. Was it just a nice, fluffy introduction, or was it the supreme law? These massive shifts in perspective over just a few tumultuous decades literally shaped the core of the nation's highest laws. Now let's zoom in on the two most critical moments from that timeline. Back in the 1960 Ruberbari Union case, the Supreme Court took a really narrow view. They held that the preamble was not a part of the Constitution. They said it couldn't be used as a substantive source of power, it was just a key to open the minds of the makers. But as you probably know, overruling a previous Supreme Court decision is a massive legal earthquake. And that is exactly what happened in 1973 with the Kesavananda Bharti case. This was the ultimate turning point. The court definitively shifted the preamble's status
totally overruling Barabari and establishing it as an integral, vital, organic part of the Constitution. And more importantly, they ruled that the objectives specified in the preamble contained the basic elements or the basic structure of the Constitution itself. Which brings us to Section 4, amending the basic structure. How do you test the limits of this foundation? Our source notes reveal the real-world application of this doctrine. It was observed that Parliament's power to amend the Constitution isn't just absolute, it's firmly bound by that basic structure we just talked about. And yet, the basic structure itself was identified using that primary tool, the Preamble. This exact framework is what allowed for the famous 42nd Amendment in 1976. As the source material details, this amendment explicitly wove the concepts of socialist and secular, as well as unity and integrity of the nation, right into the text of the Preamble. And the courts held these amendments to be valid, using the Preamble itself to ascertain the spirit of these massive constitutional shifts. And as we see in a 1994 S.R. Bomme case, the court didn't just passively accept these new words, they completely solidified them. They reaffirmed that the secular nature of the state, as declared in the Preamble, is a fundamental feature of the basic structure. So these weren't just superficial words tacked on by a legislature. The court recognized them as unshakable pillars of the nation's legal identity. It just further proves that the guiding star has true binding legal power. Finally, Section 5, a living organic document. Now, our source captures a really beautiful and honestly profound observation from the court regarding how a constitution actually survives across centuries. I mean, think about it. How does a document written by people in the past possibly meet the shifting, unpredictable needs of a constantly changing world? Well, I want you to really think about this quote from the notes. Fundamental rights themselves are empty vessels with no content, into which each generation must pour its content in the light of its experience. It is just such a perfect way to capture why a constitutional preamble absolutely cannot be a static servant. It has to be a dynamic framework, capable of holding the values of tomorrow. The preamble essentially provides the shape of the vessel, but society's evolving experience provides the liquid inside. So, as we wrap up this explainer, we've seen how a preamble transformed from a mere introduction to the supreme guiding star of a nation's legal system, outranking statutory limits and defining the basic structure of the law itself. But it remains a living document. So I'll leave you with this provocative thought. As society continues to evolve at breakneck speed, how will future generations interpret and expand upon this living, organic, guiding star? What new experiences will they pour into those empty vessels? Thanks so much for joining me on this deep dive, and keep questioning the foundations.